There's a summary on the Cold War presentations. They will be out of sequence and make references to other units. So we first start off with the Knights of Labor, some of the 1920s labor advocacy groups that emerge. Here I have a image of Eugene Debs. If you don't remember, he was a member of the International Workers of the World, trying to rally the individuals in the early 1900s to unite the workers of the world. And so all I did here is to get you to think about the Knights of Labor and the American Federation of Labor, because you cannot think about capitalism and communism without looking at the working people. When we look at this particular image, we see the strength and unity among the workers. And that's pretty much it. The reason why I included this slide, just to get you to think that the United States definitely has some long-term history with looking at some of these ideas. We're going to transition here into World War II. At the end of World War II, we have the creation of the United Nations. And the key part for our class is going to be looking at the Security Council, which consists of Russia, Britain, France, the United States, and China. So if we look at the United Nations and we take Russia and China, two communist states during the Cold War, we possibly are going to be in a situation where we will have always a 2-3 split on issues, especially if the issue is something that is going to impact one side and give the other side the advantage. So for the most part, the United Nations is also a split Cold War battlefield. Also at the end of World War II, we have the decision to drop the nuclear bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, which leads to a situation where the United States has the nuclear monopoly. So what does that mean? That pretty much means that the United States, if they choose to do so, could use the threat of nuclear annihilation to get what they want politically on the global stage. Here I included a map that just looks at the world with the amount of nuclear warheads that are in existence according to this particular image here. And I also want you to take note that there are certain places that have nuclear weapons. So that nuclear monopoly will be broken at some particular point, and that's a result of the fighting between the United States and the Soviet Union through the arms race of nuclear weapons. I also put in here the Baruch Plan, and this particular plan here dealt with the attempt to try to eliminate nuclear weapons, but this definitely was conditional, as we see here, some tension within the United Nations Security Council. So for the most part, the Cold War is definitely going to be about military hardware, and you always want to think about if they have a supersonic plane and you do not, then you are losing the Cold War. If they have a cannon that can shoot these planes out of the sky, and you do not, then you are losing the Cold War. So what is this going to lead to? This is going to lead to the military-industrial complex. And this is an idea that once you get caught up in spending, this is going to be a situation where a lot of military jobs are going to be created, and those military jobs are going to be dependent on the government constantly putting money into military. So let's just say through the military-industrial complex, 10%, I'm making these numbers up, of the economy are in military-related items. Then that means that if you just gut military spending, that is going to be a 10% loss of the economy. Let's move on here. Détente and mutually assured destruction. So these are, this détente is more of the 1970s, and it's usually associated with the cool down period. And the cool down period is probably a result of mutually assured destruction. The agreement or the understanding that if one side drops a nuke, the other side will drop a nuke, and then that's it, as you can see in this political cartoon drawing that I was able to find online. Now, in the United States, they definitely are concerned about always trying to have the advantage against their enemy during the Cold War. And one of the ways they're going to go about doing this is by using the RAND Corporation. So the RAND Corporation is a government think tank, and they address numerous items from education to military and so on. Feel free to look them up. They are going to come up with this idea of game theory, which is addressed in another screencast. So I'm not really going to say much about that one here, but game theory is a RAND Corporation product. Let's move on. Iron Curtain speech. So the Iron Curtain speech is a speech that is going to talk about an imaginary border, which we see here in this political cartoon. It is the imaginary border that is going to separate the communists from the capitalists primarily in Europe. It's looking at the division between capitalism and communism. It is an imaginary line, and it is based on a speech, as we see the excerpt right here, where they're outlining the borders for that curtain. Truman Doctrine. This is the United States, late 40s response to issues that are going on in other areas, and this is going to pretty much guide U.S. foreign policy in the late 40s going into the 1950s. Not assigned as a topic, but this definitely is something that is going to be crucial. So I included it here just to give you some ideological understanding. So for the most part, the Cold War, the world is going to be split in two. You're either going to be in the capitalist or the communist side. If you are not, then you are probably going to get the label of the third world, which meant you were probably not aligned with either of the two sides. So here we see image of the NATO and the Warsaw Pact. I've included the dates just to get you to think about those treaties, those alliances. The non-alignment movement. So here's what's the non-alignment movement's about. For the most part in the Cold War, we're going to be talking about numerous places: Cuba, Ghana, Vietnam, Cambodia, and so on. So for the most part, people in these areas are going to have to decide: are they going to be part of the capitalist side, or are they going to be part of the communist side? The non-alignment movement was an attempt to try to get those nations that were not part of the capitalist communist selection and try to get these individuals to kind of play a middle ground and not be caught up in the tension between these two sides. This will probably make a little more sense after we get through some of these other areas, which is the next section. So here I have an image of the Atlantic Charter. The Atlantic Charter was promising independence movements, moving away from imperialism, and it led to nationalists in different places. And my example here is Kwame Nkrumah from Ghana. Kwame Nkrumah wanted to chart his own course. He did not want to be part of the capitalist communist divide, but he definitely needs to figure out a way to do something for the betterment of his people, which puts him in a situation eventually where he becomes, I don't want to say hostile, but somewhat problematic to the U.S. as a result of his socialistic ideas. Maybe this was a mixed signal where the United States just viewed some of his policies as too communist leaning. In either case, the United States would cut back funding for Kwame Nkrumah, and I've included that item here because going back to that Atlantic Charter. If you look at the Atlantic Charter, he's probably under the assumption that he is free and independent, but I guess the two sides have something else planned. The Bay of Pigs, Cuba is definitely going to be a problem for the United States, primarily because of its proximity to the United States. Here we see Florida, here we see Cuba. And very similar to what's going to happen to Kwame Nkrumah, there is going to be a change of leadership. In this case, it is going to be Fidel Castro. Why does Fidel Castro think that he could chart his own course and do what he wants? It's probably a result of some of the ideas in the Atlantic Charter, which was a product of World War II. So there definitely is going to be tension between JFK with Cuba, and that definitely is going to be a thorn in the U.S. side in the 50s, late 50s, going definitely into the 60s, where there seems to be a lot of U.S. tension with Cuba. Here we're looking at another area, Pakistan. A.Q. Khan, we see this Pakistani nationalist hero credited with getting Pakistan the nuclear bomb. Why would Pakistan want the nuclear bomb? Because they have issues with India. So I'm going to put here India, Pakistan. So if India has the nuclear bomb, they're going to want the nuclear bomb. And so these two are caught up because they're going to have to pick a side. Are they going to align themselves with the capitalists? Are they going to align themselves with the communists? At the end of the day, both sides probably wants to get the nuke in case they want to figure out a way to destroy their enemy. And so for this particular slide, there's a little more involved that we'll address later on that involves Afghanistan. But A.Q. Khan is pretty much the individual that's responsible for getting Pakistan the nuclear bomb. Let's move on. Let's see what else we have. The Berlin Wall, another area that gets caught up. If you remember, Germany was split into four and then cut down into two during the Cold War. So that's kind of what this is. It's another dividing, division. But this is looking at Berlin, Germany's capital. But remember, during World War II, Germany was split into four sections. and now it seems to be caught up into you're either part of the capitalists or the communists. The Berlin Wall, just so you know, is actually in Berlin. This is the Berlin section, which is the Soviet chunk right there. Also, the Cambodian genocide. This is something that takes place when Long No versus Pol Pot. Long Nol over here. Here's Pol Pot. They get caught up in a civil war. Pol Pot winds up winning. Here is 1975 when the Khmer Rouge comes to power, and then they wind up going on a genocide, killing over 1 million people, some for having ties to the Western way of life. OPEC. You're going to start to see a lot of alliances. OPEC is an alliance of primarily Arab states that are going to try to use oil production and supply to try to get what they want to, on a political scale, achieved. Keep in mind, members are not in the United Nations, so OPEC, by the manipulation of fuel, could definitely be a way to kind of get your political objectives met. Technology, we're going to move on. So the Cold War definitely is about technology. I use these two topics here just to get you to think about some of the absurd inventions. This is going back to World War II, where the Nazis may or may not have tried to create a time machine known as the Glock, the Nazi Bell. And of course, we have Lisa Meitner, who was working on technology during World War II that probably would have given Germany the upper hand with regard to nuclear technology. And, when we're talking about nuclear fission, nuclear fusion, these are things that are going to make sense at a later day in class when we start looking at nuclear weapons. Project Azorion, this is an interesting story because it shows, again, technology and the absurd technology during the Cold War. So here, the United States is basically trying to capture a sub. They make this ship with the sole purpose of capturing a sub that is at the bottom of the ocean. So think about the amount of money it's going to cost to make that. The Philadelphia experiment, this is another initiative here. This is about teleportation. There's a lot of conspiracy theories on this, but for the most part, the United States may or may not have made a ship and tried to teleport it. And then the end result, this is, I'm assuming here, made up on something, but you have stories and reports of some of the individuals on board where they were caught through walls because apparently this was successful or not. Another technology issue is Bikini Atoll. Bikini Atoll is a testing place for U.S. nuclear weapons. And feel free to look up the link between Bikini Atoll and SpongeBob. But Bikini Atoll is a test facility where the United States is trying to figure out a way to make bigger and better nuclear weapons. In the 1980s, once you get into a situation where either side has nuclear weapons, let's say the U.S. has 8,000, the Russians have 8,000, that's problematic. Strategic Defense Initiative was designed in case nuclear bombs were launched from Russia, that satellites in outer space would be able to shoot them down. So that's what's going on. They're going to launch a nuke, and we're going to be able to shoot these things down, and it's going to act like a nuclear missile shield. Think about the amount of money that the government is spending here on all of these items. Definitely seems to be a lot, which is where Whitey on the Moon comes in. This is a song critiquing U.S. spending. And here you read some of the lyrics here. This individual can't pay his doctor bill. He's got rats. This individual is poor. However, Whitey is on the moon, which is a reference to Sputnik and the space race. Basically, the amount of spending that is going into technology that probably could be devoted into other areas like society. SALT and SALT II are two treaties. These treaties were designed to reduce the amount of nuclear weapons, as you see right here, just as nuclear limits. Some of the social issues, CONOPRO, this slide here, this is an FBI organization designed with the intent of infiltrating leftist groups like the Black Panther Party, any sort of labor advocacy group, AIM, Mattachine Society, and trying to get those, those leaders, evaluated, whether or not they have connections to communism, which brings up the next topic, which is homosexuality in the Cold War. With homosexuality in the Cold War, there's an issue about whether or not the government should use this executive order, which is designed to go after homosexuals in the military. So you see here in the image, you see DC with the government initiating what becomes known as the Lavender Scare. And the Lavender Scare was an attempt to try to weed out homosexuals from working in the United States government. Therapeutic Abortion Committee. Abortion was used to fight the Cold War. For the most part, they wanted to take the nuclear family and say that if we're going to beat the Soviets, we have to have a strong family. So if people are getting abortions, which is what these charts are showing here, That is going to be problematic to the family, and we have to win the Cold War, and we're going to win the Cold War by having a strong family unit. So for the most part, they're saying if you get an abortion, we're going to lose the Cold War. And you could possibly even make a connection to homosexuality, because they're going to look at homosexuals and say that they also are problematic, because these individuals are anti-family. Keep in mind that it's the view of the time, not my personal view, but it's looking at the Cold War and how you could possibly win through either limiting abortion or trying to crack down on homosexuals. So the Therapeutic Abortion Committee, they were hospitals that had a committee that could determine who could and could not get an abortion. Next up, arts and entertainment. If you click this link, it'll take you to a site where you could put in a nuclear bomb, and the nuclear bomb would, once you figure out the size of the bomb, it would give you an idea of the devastation. So you could just put in a city, a place, an address, and you could get an idea of how much impact a nuclear bomb would have in that area, which is why in the 1950s, Americans in schools are being told to duck and cover under their desk in case there's a nuclear war. So poor Billy over here is probably going to be safe in his school as long as he hides under his desk. When the Russians launch a nuclear bomb, this individual is going to be safe. Bondo Goes to Bitburg. It's a reference to a song. This is Ronald Reagan taking place in the 80s, where he issued a speech, and people were critical because there were individuals that may or may not have participated in the genocide of World War II. So this song is a criticism on the President Ronald Reagan, who they felt was politicizing during the Cold War by issuing a speech at this particular place. The Day After was a film of the 1980s. This was a film that was supposed to depict what it would look like if there was ever a nuclear war, and for the most part scared the hell out of anybody watching this in the 1980s. That film was designed to get you to think about what you should and should not do during a nuclear attack. The HUAC, this was government going after Hollywood, the House of Un-American Activities, and the Hollywood 10 was when Congress pulled in directors, people from Hollywood, to try to get them to remove their communist imagery within their films. And just another slide here about some of the Cold War films that existed. War Games was about a kid who was a hacker, who winds up hacking into a computer system, and it's actually NORAD. Here you see Rocky fighting Drago in Rocky IV. Here's an image from Dr. Strangelove. All of these films are films that address communism. Political. So last up is political, and this is about skyjacking, which is a plane hijacking. And looking at this particular slide where you see the amount of planes that were hijacked from 1968 to 1972. I don't remember if it's 169. It's definitely 150 or higher. But for the most part, planes were hijacked, and they had something to do with Cuba. So that's what this slide here is trying to show you. And this is a photograph of Ty Bin, who was one of the people hijacking a plane dealing with Vietnam, and apparently gets into a scuffle with the crew members. They wind up throwing this individual out the plane after they shoot him. And so this is an image of him on the ground on the tarmac after his failed hijacking attempt. That's it.